The glittering jet brooch on Lady Elara Vance's gown felt cold as a gravestone against her skin. It was a strange thing, really, to feel such a chill while spinning under the hot, golden light of 1,000 candles. The grand ballroom of Harrogate House was a sea of color and sound on this last night of the London season. July 12, 1812. The air tasted like honey from the beeswax candles and the faint, sweet sweat of 300 dancing bodies. Elara's feet moved in the practiced steps of the waltz, but her mind was elsewhere, fixed on the weight of the black brooch. It had been her mother's, a final gift, said to bring fortune. Right now, it just felt heavy. Her partner, Julian Blackwood, the Duke of Thornwood, was a man of few words and even fewer expressions. He held her with perfect, rigid formality, his hand on her back as impersonal as the marble column beside them. He was tall, with hair the color of dark walnut, and eyes that seemed to look right through the lavish room. People called him the reluctant Duke, and Elara was beginning to understand why. He moved through the dance like it was a military drill, every step precise, every turn calculated. There was no joy in it for him. Elara, however, was known for her joy. They called her the sunshine heiress from the Sussex coast. A girl with hair the color of ripe wheat and a laugh that could, supposedly, brighten the gloomiest drawing room. She practiced that laugh in the mirror every morning. Right now, the muscles in her cheeks ached from holding her smile. She was 20 years old, and this was her 3rd season. This dance, with this Duke, was the most important one of her life. Her family's estate, Summerfield, was quietly crumbling. Its debts, nearly £80,000, were a secret stone in her stomach, heavier than any brooch. A match with the Duke of Thornwood wasn't just a hope, it was a necessity. As they turned near the orchestra, the light caught the Duke's face. For a split second, Elara saw something beneath his cool exterior. Not emotion, but a kind of careful emptiness. It was a look she knew. She'd seen it in her own reflection when she practiced her smile, when she forced her voice to sound light and carefree. He was performing, too. The realization was a tiny crack in the glittering surface of the evening. This man, wrapped in privilege and power, was as trapped in his role as she was in hers. The waltz was building to its final notes. The violins sang. The hem of Elara's sapphire blue gown whispered against the polished floor. She could see her Aunt Agnes watching from the sidelines, her fan fluttering with anxious hope. She could see the other debutantes, their eyes sharp with envy and assessment. The clock above the mantel, a grand thing with golden cherubs, inched toward midnight. Time was running out, in more ways than one. Then it happened. From the minstrel's gallery high above, a single, discordant chord screeched through the music. It was a wrong note, harsh and jarring, like a slate pencil dragged across stone. The Duke flinched. It wasn't just a startle. It was a full-body reaction. His hand on her back spasmed, his fingers digging into the silk of her gown for one shocking instant. His perfect posture broke. His face, for a fleeting moment, was not that of a composed Duke, but of a man struck by something terrible. The world seemed to slow. Elara felt the jolt travel from his hand straight up her spine. Her own smile froze on her face. As quickly as it came, the moment ended. The musician recovered. The sweet melody swept back in, covering the mistake like water over a stone. The Duke's mask slid back into place, colder and harder than before. He corrected their step, but the rhythm between them was gone. The air had changed. He looked down at her, his eyes now dark and focused, and she saw a flicker of something new there. Annoyance, maybe, or embarrassment. His voice, when he spoke, was so low only she could hear it. A rough murmur under the swell of the violins. "You're off the beat," he said. The words were a criticism, but they felt like a confession. He wasn't talking about the dance. He was talking about the flaw in the performance, the crack they had both revealed. The final, proper chord from the orchestra hit them then, loud and decisive, ringing in Elara's ears like a verdict. The dance was over. He released her, gave a stiff bow, and without another word, turned and began to move away through the crowd. Elara stood rooted to the spot, the cold of the brooch seeping into her chest. Around her, the ballroom buzzed with renewed chatter and laughter, but she felt separate from it all. She watched the Duke's broad shoulders disappear into a crowd of admirers and titles. That one discordant note hung in the air between them, a question mark made of sound. What was it about that particular mistake that could shatter a Duke's composure so completely? And what did it mean that she, Elara, Vance, sunshine and all, was the only one who had seen it? The night was supposed to be a beginning, but as the clock struck the first note of midnight, it felt like an ending. And yet, a strange thread now connected her to the reluctant Duke, a thread spun from a secret, a misstep, and a shared moment of very real, very human surprise. Her season, her future, everything now hinged on understanding the man who couldn't bear a wrong note in a song. 3 days after the ball. The bouquet of white roses the Duke had sent sat on the walnut desk in Elara's suite at her aunt's London townhouse. Their petals, once tight and perfect, had begun to curl at the edges, browning like old paper. They were a proper gesture, but they felt as silent as the man who sent them. The note had been just 4 words. With compliments, Thornwood. No warmth, no poetry. Just a fact. The invitation that followed was just as brief. A morning ride in Hyde Park. Not a request, really, more of an expectation. Elara's Aunt Agnes had nearly fainted with joy, pressing a new riding habit of deep forest green into her arms. "This is it, my dear," she'd whispered, her eyes bright. "The path to security, just be your charming self." But Elara wasn't sure what her charming self was anymore. Not after seeing that crack in the Duke's armor. As her maid Bess fastened the long row of tiny buttons on the habit, Elara felt like she was being strapped into a suit of armor herself. The wool was scratchy against her neck. The Duke arrived at precisely 10 o'clock in a dark carriage. His own horse, a massive black gelding named Titan, tethered behind. He helped her into the saddle of a gentle gray mare named Mist, his hands efficient and gloved. His greeting was a nod. The morning was cool for July, the sky a pale, watery blue. For the first 15 minutes, they rode in a silence broken only by the crunch of gravel under hooves, the jingle of tack, and the distant calls of other early riders. He pointed out landmarks with the detached air of a tour guide. The Serpentine Lake, he'd say. The ring for carriages. Elara's cheeks began to ache from forcing a pleasant expression. She tried conversation. "The park is so peaceful at this hour," she offered. "It is less crowded," he replied. She tried again. "Mist is a very gentle ride. She is reliable," he answered. It was like talking to a wall. A very handsome, very well-dressed wall. The hope that had flickered in her after the ball began to dim. Maybe she had imagined that moment of connection. Maybe he was just a cold, difficult man. They turned onto a shaded path, the oak trees creating a canopy overhead. The air smelled of damp earth and green leaves. It was then, from a thicket to their left, that a pheasant exploded into flight with a frantic clatter of wings. Titan, the Duke's horse, shied violently. But it wasn't the horse's reaction that struck Elara, it was the Duke's. He didn't curse or struggle for control. He went perfectly, terribly still. Then, in one sharp motion, he wheeled Titan around and kicked him into a gallop, plunging off the main path and into the woods. He didn't look back. He just vanished. Elara sat on Mist, stunned. The pheasant was long gone. The peaceful morning sounds returned. But her heart was hammering against her ribs. This wasn't annoyance. This was a retreat. A flight. She waited a full minute, maybe 2, expecting him to return, embarrassed, with an excuse. He didn't. A strange feeling rose in her chest, pushing aside her practiced charm. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was a deep, frustrated understanding. He was running from something. And she was tired of being left standing still, smiling politely. Without allowing herself to think, she nudged Mist off the path and into the trees. Following the trail of trampled ferns and broken branches Titan had left behind. The woods grew thicker. The sunlight filtering through in dusty shafts. She could hear the sound before she saw the source. A hard, rhythmic asterisk, thwack, thwack, thwack asterisk. It wasn't the clean chop of a woodsman. It was angry, relentless, jarring. She found him in a small clearing. A great old oak had fallen in a recent storm, and the Duke was attacking it with an axe she guessed he'd taken from a woodcutter's shed. His jacket was discarded on a stump, his white shirt damp with sweat and clinging to his shoulders. Each swing was brutal, a release of some torrent of emotion he'd locked away in the ballroom, on the riding path. Wood chips flew like sparks. His face was a mask of pure, unfiltered effort, his breath coming in sharp grunts. Elara slid off Mist, her boots sinking into the soft moss. She didn't speak. She didn't know what to say. The raw physicality of his grief, for that's what it clearly was overwhelming. This was the shattered truth beneath the polished Duke. She looked at the pile of split logs, at the relentless, punishing work. An idea formed, simple and clear. She walked forward, right to the edge of the clearing. He didn't see her, lost in the rhythm of his swing. She waited until he paused, the axe head sinking into the thick log. Then, she stepped forward, reached out, and picked up a heavy piece of split wood from the pile. He finally noticed her. He went still again, but this was a different stillness. He watched, chest heaving, as she carried the chunk of oak, her arms straining under its weight, and placed it carefully on the broad, flat stump he was using as a block. She stepped back, meeting his gaze. Her hands were already smarting, a blister forming on her right palm. She didn't wipe the smudge of dirt from her cheek. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. The forest sounds rushed back, in the chirp of birds, the sigh of the wind in the leaves. The wildness in his eyes slowly faded, replaced by a stunned, exhausted confusion. He pulled the axe from the log and walked over to the stump. He looked down at the piece she had chosen. Then he reached out and turned it over with his boot. There, on the freshly revealed face of the wood, was the heart of the problem. The growth rings, which should have been solid and firm, were marred by a deep, spreading stain of black and spongy rot. It ran right through the center of the log, hidden from the outside, weakening it from within. Powder rot, he said, his voice hoarse from exertion. It was the first real thing he'd said to her all day. He pointed the axe head at the blackened core. Hidden, it weakens everything, makes it look sound, until it falls. He wasn't just talking about the tree. The truth of it landed in the quiet clearing. The wrong note at the ball, the fleeing horse, this furious labor, it was all connected. Something was rotten, hidden in his past, and it was making him splinter. Elara looked from the rotten wood to his tired, open face. The mask was gone. Here was just a man, hurting, and she was a woman with her own hidden fractures. The careful performance of the ride, the Sunshine Heiress act, felt miles away. In this quiet green space, they were just two people who understood hiding. She rubbed her sore palm against the rough wool of her habit. Her voice, when she found it, was soft, but it cut through the quiet as clearly as his axe had. "I have scars, too," she whispered. It was all she said. But it was enough. His eyes held hers, and for the first time, he truly saw her. Not Lady Elara Vance, the potential bride, but Elara, a person carrying her own weight. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. A shared secret now lay in the clearing between them, as tangible as the split wood and the cold axe. He bent down, picked up his discarded jacket, and wiped the sweat from his brow. The frantic energy was spent. He looked at the fallen tree, then back at her. "We should return," he said, but his tone was different. It wasn't a command, it was an acknowledgement of her, of the moment. As they walked back to the horses, leading them this time, the silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of unspoken questions. What other rot was hidden in the foundations of his world? The world she was being pushed to join. And if his family's history was marred by a hidden flaw, what did that mean for her family's desperate hopes? The ride back to the townhouse was quiet, but Elara's mind was louder than ever. The game had changed. It was no longer about simply securing a duke. It was about understanding the mainland, the hidden rot that could topple everything. The moonlight that night was a cold, blue visitor in Elara's room. It painted a long, narrow rectangle across the floral carpet, and she watched it slowly crawl from the wardrobe to the foot of her bed, marking the hours she could not sleep. The house on Brook Street was silent, save for the distant, regular tick-tock of the long case clock in the hall downstairs. Each tick felt like a tiny hammer tap on the secret stone of debt in her stomach. She sat at her dressing table, still in her evening wrap. The jet brooch lay in front of her, a dark pool against the pale wood. She picked it up. It wasn't cold anymore. It had absorbed the warmth of the room, of her nervous hands. Her mother had called it a luck piece, a charm to attract solid fortune. But as Elara turned it over, she saw the cheap pinch of the clasp, the slight unevenness of the carving. It was a piece of costume jewelry, a hopeful fake, just like her smile, just like this entire courtship. She looked at her reflection in the silvered glass. The girl who looked back had tired eyes. She saw the careful architecture of her daytime face, the practiced curve of the lips, the cheerful lift of the brows. Tonight, without an audience, it had all fallen away. What was left was someone she barely recognized, a strategist, a performer trading laughs for security. Her sunshine wasn't resilience, it was camouflage, a bright coat of paint over a frightened heart. She was a beautifully packaged liar, and the Duke was a fortress of silent grief. What a pair they made. Aunt Ananas's words from dinner echoed in the quiet. "He is clearly taken with you alone. His silence is just refinement. Think of Summerfield, dear. Think of your brother." Charles, her older brother, was a good man but a terrible manager. His latest letter, which she had burned in the candle flame after reading, detailed new debts from a bad investment in a shipping venture. Another £5,000. The numbers swirled in the dark, a dizzying descent. The Duke had been different since the clearing, not warm, but present. He'd sent another note, this one longer, suggesting they walk through the Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens 2 days hence. It was a gesture, a step. A fragile bridge was being built over their shared moment of truth. Then, as the first gray light of dawn began to bleed into the sky, a different letter arrived. It was delivered not by the usual post, but by a grimy-faced boy who shoved it into the cook's hand at the servants' entrance. Cook, wide-eyed, brought it straight to Elara's room. The paper was coarse and cheap. The handwriting was an ugly scrawl. It was from a Mr. Grimes, a moneylender in a part of London Elara had only heard of in whispers. It stated, in blunt, cruel terms, that her brother's debts to him totaling £3,000 were now due in full. And then came the sentence that turned the air in her lungs to ice. I am aware of your familial negotiations with His Grace the Duke of Thornwood. Such a connection surely signifies imminent solvency. Payment is expected by fortnight's end, or the nature of these debts and your brother's indiscretions will become public knowledge. The paper trembled in her hand. The threat was as clear as the dawn, now illuminating the room. This man, Grimes, would expose them. He would splash their shame all over London, just as she was trying to secure their future. He would tell the world that the Sunshine Heiress was a fraud from a crumbling house. And he would detail every foolish mistake her brother had made. The Duke's family, so strict about honor and appearance, would drop her immediately. The bridge would burn before they even set foot on it. Her choice was a monstrous, impossible thing. It sat in her stomach like shards of glass. Option 1. She could go to the Duke. She could tell him everything. Throw herself on his mercy. She could use his growing, quiet connection to her as leverage to save her family. But that would mean exposing Julian to scandal before it even broke, forcing him to clean up her family's mess. It would be using their fragile, real moment in the woods as a transaction. She would become exactly what the gossips might whisper a fortune hunter. She would confirm every suspicion he might have about being used for his title. Option 2. She could say nothing. She could try to find the money somehow. Sell the last of her mother's good jewelry, beg distant relatives. She could protect the Duke from the ugliness, preserve the delicate understanding growing between them. But she would almost certainly fail. In a fortnight the scandal would break anyway, and she would be revealed as a liar by omission. Summerfield would be lost. Her family would be ruined. There was no good path, only a choice between betraying him or betraying her own blood. The moonlight was gone, replaced by the flat, judgmental light of morning. Birds began to chirp outside, a sound that felt cruelly cheerful. A soft knock came at her door. It was Bess, her maid. His Grace's man is here, miss, she said through the wood. The Duke has sent a gift, and he's asked if you would receive him this afternoon at 4. Elara closed her eyes. The world was moving forward, demanding the performance to continue, even as the stage cracked beneath her feet. Yes, Bess, thank you. The gift was a book, not poetry, but a heavy, leather-bound volume on the flora and fauna of Sussex, her home county. It was thoughtful, specific. He had been listening when she'd mentioned missing the sea air. She ran her fingers over the embossed title, and the kindness of it made her eyes sting. It made the choice even more horrible. The day passed in a blur of pretend normalcy. She drank tea with Aunt Agnes, who chattered about Vauxhall Gardens. She nodded and smiled, the stone in her stomach growing heavier with each passing hour. At 10 minutes to 4, she stood in the drawing room, the jet brooch once again pinned to her gown. A symbol of the fortune she was supposed to attract. She felt like a prisoner awaiting sentence. He arrived exactly on time. He looked more at ease than she had ever seen him, though at ease for the Duke was merely a slight softening around the eyes. He inquired after her health. He mentioned that the book's illustrator was a friend of a friend. He was trying, really trying. And Elara, who had rehearsed a dozen cheerful nothings, found her words dying in her throat. The pressure of the secret, the weight of the choice, was too much. She saw the careful hope in his actions, the bridge he was building plank by plank. She pictured Mr. Grimes's ugly scrawl tearing it all down. Is something troubling you, Lady L? He asked, his voice low. The use of her title felt formal, but his gaze was direct. This was her moment. She could speak. She could unburden herself. The words trembled on her lips. Asterisk, my family is drowning. We are being blackmailed. I am not the sunny, uncomplicated girl, you think. Asterisk, but she saw his face as it had been in the clearing raw. Unguarded, trusting her with a piece of his shattered past. If she spoke now, she would be dragging him into her chaos. She would be trading his trust for her survival. She took a sharp, quiet breath. The performer won. The sunshine heiress smiled. A brittle, beautiful thing. Nothing at all, Your Grace. I am only a little tired from the excitement of the season. He studied her face for a long moment. He didn't look convinced. He took a step closer, and the air in the room seemed too thin. His next question wasn't that of a polite suitor. It was the question of a man who had seen hidden rot before, and was checking the wood for soft spots. What is your price, heiress? He asked quietly. The question was a dagger. It assumed everything she feared was true, that this was all a transaction, that she had a number, that her smiles were for sale. It was the very doubt she had been trying to avoid creating, and by not telling him the truth, she had led him straight to it. The conversation ended soon after. Polite? Strained. He left, and she stood in the middle of the sunny drawing room, feeling utterly alone. The clock ticked. The scent of his sandalwood soap lingered in the air. She walked slowly to the window and watched his carriage pull away. The answer to his question was simple. Her price was her family's safety. Her price was Summerfield's survival. But the cost of collecting it might be her own integrity, and the first real connection she'd ever felt. And then Elara realized her sunshine was a lie. It wasn't just a tool. It was a cage. It had kept everyone, including the Duke, from seeing the real her, the worried sister. The desperate daughter. The woman who was capable of silence and sacrifice. She had been so busy broadcasting light that she'd never let anyone see her shadows. Now, in the silence he left behind, the shadows were all she had. The choice was hers, and neither path led to the sunny, simple future she'd once imagined. For the first time, she had to decide who Elara Vance really was. When no one was watching, and the performance was finally over, the fortnight of grace from Mr. Grimes, the moneylender, became a clock ticking inside Elara's skull. Each sunrise was a countdown, and each sunset brought the dreaded deadline closer. She sold what she could: her mother's pearl earbobs, a slender gold bracelet. It amounted to £200, a drop in a 3,000-pound ocean. She wrote pleading letters to 2 elderly, wealthy cousins in Scotland. No reply came. The only fixed point in the chaos was the Duke's invitation to the final grand ball of the season at the illustrious Marlborough House. It was the event where courtships were either solidified or shattered. Aunt Agnes, oblivious to the storm, threw herself into the preparations. A new gown was commissioned. A masterpiece of silver-threaded lavender silk that cost more than Elara's secret jewelry sale had gained. You must shine, my dear, Agnes whispered, her fingers trembling with excitement as the dressmaker adjusted the bodice. You must outshine everyone. As Bess tightened the corset strings that morning, the pressure felt different. It wasn't confinement, it was focus. Elara looked at her reflection in the full-length mirror. The lavender gown was beautiful, but it was just another costume. The girl who had practiced smiles in the mirror was gone. In her place was a woman with a clear, terrible purpose. Her sunshine had been a tool for pleasing. Now, she realized, her charm could be a tool for something else. A diversion. She unpinned the jet brooch from her old gown and fastened it inside a hidden pocket of the lavender silk. Against her skin, its weight was a reminder, not of fake luck, but of real stakes. The ballroom of Marlborough House made Harrogate House look simple. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, scattering rainbows across a sea of jewels and silks. The air was thick with perfume, ambition, and the soaring notes of a 50-piece orchestra. Elara entered on the Duke's arm. He was impeccable in black and white, his expression a familiar, polite mask, but his hand over hers felt firm, almost protective. He had been quiet but steadfast in their meetings since his price question. He was giving her a chance, and the guilt of her secret gnawed at her. She scanned the room. Not for friends, but for threats, and she found him immediately. Lord Hemlock, the Duke's cousin, a tall, sleek man with a smile that never reached his cold, pale eyes. He was watching them from near a potted palm, a glass of champagne in his hand. Elara had heard the whispers. Hemlock was the heir if Julian never married. He had the most to lose from this match. The Duke led her into the first dance, a stately man. You look different tonight, Lady Elara, he murmured as they passed each other. It is the lighting. Your Grace, she replied, her voice steady. She was different. She was a general, surveying a battlefield as the dance ended. She saw Hemlock begin to move, cutting through the crowd with a predator's grace. He was heading for Julian, who had stepped toward a group of older gentlemen by the terrace doors. This was it. Hemlock would say something sly, plant a seed of doubt about her family, ask a pointed question about Sussex investments. He would probe for the rot. Her old self would have waited, smiled, hoped. Her new self acted. She didn't move toward the Duke. Instead, she turned and walked directly to the center of the room, where a cluster of the season's most notorious gossips, led by the formidable Lady Portsmouth, held court. Elara painted her brightest, most dazzling smile onto her face, the one she had practiced for years. She let out a light, charming laugh that turned heads. "Lady Portsmouth," she exclaimed, her voice a carrying, happy chime. "What a spectacular evening. Tell me, is it true the ices are flavored with real Sicilian lemons? I simply must know." It was a ridiculous, frivolous question, and it was perfect. Lady Portsmouth, startled by being addressed so enthusiastically by the sunshine heiress at the center of everyone's curiosity, was momentarily disarmed. The other ladies turned, their eyes like magnets, drawn to Elara's radiant, uncomplicated presence. She became the sun, and all the gossipy moths fluttered toward her light. From the corner of her eye, she saw Hemlock pause, his path to Julian blocked by a sudden swirl of couples, starting a new dance. He glanced toward the commotion she was creating, a flicker of annoyance on his face. She laughed again, leaning in to share a meaningless story about lemon trees, drawing the circle of ladies tighter, creating a human wall of chiffon and curiosity between Hemlock and his target. For the next hour, she was everywhere. She complimented a dowager's enormous feather headdress. She asked a young lord about his horse's performance at Ascot. She sparkled. She shimmered. She was the life of the party. She used the very trait that felt like a lie, her performative charm, as a shield. Every time she saw Hemlock move toward Julian, she created a new diversion, drawing the social spotlight onto herself, keeping the Duke in a safe, quiet eddy at the edge of the room. She saw Julian watching her, a faint, confused frown on his face. This wasn't the quiet, thoughtful woman from the woods. This was the heiress in full, dazzling bloom. She could see the doubt creeping back into his eyes. It hurt, but it was necessary. Better he think her shallow than for Hemlock to discover they were bankrupt. Her feet ached in their satin slippers. Her jaw was tired, but she kept going. Then, during a lull in the music, she saw it. Hemlock had finally cornered Julian near a large marble statue of Apollo. Julian's back was to the room, and Hemlock was leaning in, that cold smile on his lips. The conversational buffer was gone. Elara's heart slammed against her ribs, without a second thought. She excused herself from a conversation about Italian lace and cut directly across the dance floor. The lavender silk of her gown hissed against the polished floor like a warning. She arrived just as she heard Hemlock's smooth, venomous tone. "Only wondering, cousin, if you've had your man of business look into the Sussex wool market lately. I've heard such interesting things about its stability." Julian's posture was rigid. Before he could form a reply, Elara slipped her hand through his arm. She felt the tense muscle beneath the fine wool of his coat. She looked up at him, then turned a brilliant, innocent smile on Lord Hemlock. "Our dance, I believe," she said to Julian, her voice sweet and clear. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. "A rescue." Hemlock's smile tightened. "Lady Elara," he said, bowing slightly, "you are a most vigilant partner." "One must be," she replied, her smile never wavering, "to keep hold of something truly valuable." She pulled Julian gently toward the floor as the first notes of a waltz began. For a few steps, he was stiff-leaden. He looked down at her, his eyes searching her face. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice low and rough. "Dancing," she said simply. And then, as she guided him into the turn, she added, even quieter, "He knows something's wrong. Don't talk to him alone." The shock in his eyes was momentary, then replaced by a dawning, fierce understanding. He hadn't seen a shallow socialite for the past hour. He'd seen a strategist, a protector. His hand tightened on hers, and for the first time that night, he followed her lead perfectly. They moved together, a united front, weaving through the other couples. "The book you sent," she said softly as they turned, her words just for him. "The drawing of the chalk cliffs. It was the kindest gift I've ever received." He didn't speak. He just looked at her, and the mask was gone again. In its place was a profound, grateful confusion, and something else, a burning intensity. The game was in the open now, between them at least. The final move was his to make. As the waltz swept them on, Elara knew the performance was over. The real battle was just beginning, and for the first time, they were truly facing it together. The music swelled, a promise and a challenge, and they moved as one into the unknown steps ahead. A full year has a way of softening edges. At Thornwood Abbey, the proof was everywhere, if you knew where to look. The ivy that clung to the east wing's stonework had grown thicker, greener, weaving a living tapestry over old scars in the rock. In the woods where a rotten oak once lay, the clearing was now a sunny patch of wildflowers and new, healthy saplings, their leaves a vibrant, tender green. And in the morning room, which was no longer a formal, chilly space but Elara's bright, messy studio, sunlight streamed through the windows, warming the spines of her plant books and glinting off the little brass telescope pointed toward the Sussex hills. It was a Tuesday morning in late August, the air already warm and sweet, with the smell of cut grass from the lawn outside. Elara sat at her broad oak desk, which was scarred with ink stains and small nicks from her gardening tools. Before her lay the household ledger, its pages filled not just with numbers, but with her own notes in the margins: new glass for the hothouse, seed order for spring, repairs to tenants' cottage roofs. The columns were neat, and more importantly, they balanced. She wore a simple dress of cream-colored linen, and pinned to the ribbon that held her accounts was the jet brooch. It didn't feel cold, and it didn't feel heavy. It felt familiar. A touchstone. Its presence there was a quiet fact, a reminder of where she'd come from, transformed into a simple marker of where she was now. It held down the pages of her real, managed, honest life. The door to the garden opened, and Julian entered. He brought the outside in with him, the scent of fresh-turned earth, of healthy sap, and a faint clean smell of sunshine on skin. His hands, no longer gloved for propriety, showed the honest marks of work, a smudge of soil near his thumb, a faint callus on his palm. He carried a small clay pot, and in it was a slender sapling, no taller than his forearm, its roots carefully bundled. "Look at this," he said, his voice holding a quiet warmth that had become their normal. He set the pot on the desk beside the ledger. "It's an oak, from one of the acorns in the clearing, the first of the new batch to look strong enough to transplant." Elara reached out and touched a tiny, perfect leaf. It was soft and waxy. She looked from the sapling to the ledger, to the brooch. A year ago, these items would have told a story of pressure, of debt, of performance. Now, they were just pieces of a day. A good day. So much had happened in that year. The frantic week after the Marlborough ball felt like a dream now. Julian had not waited for an explanation. The morning after, he had arrived at Brook Street, not in the drawing room, but in the kitchen, asking for her. He had seen Lord Hemlock's sly questioning for what it was, and he had his own solicitors dig. They found Mr. Grimes. They found the debts. Julian had not paid them off like a fairy tale prince. Instead, he had sat with Elara and her brother Charles in this very room at Thornwood, and they had worked out a plan. A loan, with proper terms, secured against Summerfield's future wool yields. It was a business arrangement that saved her family's honor and taught Charles how to lead. It was hard, practical, and utterly respectful, and Lord Hemlock, when he had made one final, public attempt to hint at scandal, Julian had simply stood before their friends and said, "My wife's family affairs are just that, they're affairs. Their integrity is not up for debate." The word wife had silenced the room. It had been a statement of fact. Long before the actual wedding in the spring, at Elara looked up at her husband. "Where shall we plant it?" "I thought," he said, leaning a hip against the desk, "near the south terrace, where it will get plenty of sun, where we can watch it grow." She nodded, a simple, full feeling in her chest. There were no grand pronouncements of love hanging in the air every moment. Instead, there was this, the shared project of a sapling, the quiet solidarity over a balanced ledger, the memory of him standing by her, not to rescue her, but to face a problem together. He looked down at the open ledger, his eyes tracing her notes. Then he reached out and covered her hand with his palm was warm, slightly rough. His thumb brushed over the faint, almost gone line of the blister she'd earned that day in the clearing, picking up a split log to show him she understood. "It's a strong root," he said, nodding at the little tree. He wasn't just talking about the oak. He was talking about them, about the messy, honest, unperformative thing they had built from a foundation of shared secrets and chosen trust. Their bond wasn't a glittering, fragile thing from a ballroom. It was a root, growing in the dark, solid earth, strong enough to hold up something meant to last. Elara turned her hand under his and laced their fingers together. She didn't say, "I love you." She had said it before, and she would say it again, but in this sunny, ordinary moment, it was written in every other detail, in the ledger that showed their shared life, in the brooch that remembered her past, in the sapling that promised their future. Outside, a cloud passed over the sun, then moved on. The room brightened again. The clock on the mantel chimed softly, marking the hour. There were meetings to attend, letters to write, a tree to plant, a whole life to live. It was not a perfect, fairy tale life. It was a real one, built plank by plank, root by root, on a foundation they had inspected together for hidden rot, and found, in the end, to be sound. And as they walked out into the garden, the small oak between them, that was the most uplifting message of all. That from cracked and broken things, if tended with honesty and care, the strongest, greenest growth can begin.